fog lay thick upon Baker Street. It pressed softly against the windowpane, as though it wished to enter. Outside, the gas lamps glowed faintly. Their light struggled through the haze, casting uncertain shadows along the walls. Inside, the fire had nearly died. Only a few embers remained, breathing a dull, quiet warmth into the room. I sat in silence, listening to the steady ticking of the clock. It sounded louder than usual tonight. Sherlock Holmes sat across from me, reclined in his armchair, his long fingers pressed together, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the ceiling. He was calm, too calm. There are moments in my acquaintance with Holmes when one senses his mind has already moved ahead, following a thread invisible to all others. This was such a moment. "The night is unusually quiet," he said at last. His voice was low, measured. I glanced toward the window. "London is never truly quiet," I replied. Holmes gave the faintest smile. "Precisely, my dear Watson, which is why such quiet is rarely without cause." He rose slowly and walked toward the window. His hand rested lightly against the cold glass. For a brief instant, something moved in the fog, a shadow, or perhaps only a trick of the light. "You expect someone," I said. "No," Holmes answered, without turning. "Something has gone wrong." There was something in his tone that I had learned not to ignore, a quiet certainty that often preceded the most troubling of cases. Something has already begun. Then, from below, footsteps, slow, irregular, unsteady, as though the visitor struggled to remain composed. They stopped just outside the door. Holmes turned, and in his eyes, I saw it. That familiar spark, the beginning of a case. "Our visitor, Watson." A single knock followed, soft, restrained, yet unmistakably urgent. Holmes inclined his head slightly, as if confirming a private conclusion. "You see," he said quietly, "London does not fall silent without reason." And in that moment, before the door had even opened, I knew whoever stood on the other side was not merely a caller, but someone who had already seen something they could not explain. The door opened slowly. A woman stood at the threshold. She did not step in at once. For a moment, she simply stood there, as though she had forgotten why she had come. Holmes did not speak. He only watched her, carefully. The woman finally entered. Her movements were unsteady, her breathing uneven, I was told. She began, then stopped. Her voice trembled. "I was told you could help me." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "Pray, sit down," he said. She did not sit. Instead, she clutched the back of the chair before her, as though she needed it to remain standing. "There is a room in my house," she said. "I rent it to a young woman." She paused, swallowed. "I do not see her often, only at night." Sometimes Holmes remained still. "Tonight," she continued, "I went to her room." Another pause. Longer this time. Her fingers tightened. "I should not have gone in," she whispered. Watson stepped slightly forward, but said nothing. "I thought she was inside," the woman said. I knocked, but there was no answer. So I opened the door. The room seemed to grow colder. Even the fire behind us felt distant now. "She was there," the woman said, her voice barely audible. Lying on the floor, silence fell. Holmes did not interrupt. "Her face," she continued. "I could not see it clearly. There was blood." She closed her eyes briefly, as though the image refused to leave her. "I thought it was her, my tenant." Another pause. Then, almost in a whisper, "But I am not sure." Holmes moved at last, just one step forward. "Not sure," he repeated quietly. The woman shook her head. "I have seen her only a few times, always in poor light, always in passing." Her voice broke slightly, and the face, it did not seem right. Holmes' eyes sharpened. "You believe," he said slowly, "that the woman in the room may not be your tenant?" The woman looked at him, fear now fully visible in her eyes. "Yes." A long silence followed. Then Holmes spoke, calm, certain. "You are not afraid of a murder," he said. "You are afraid of being mistaken." The woman said nothing, but she did not deny it. Holmes turned slightly toward Watson. "The case begins," he said quietly. "We arrived shortly after. The house stood in silence, narrow, dim, unwelcoming. No light came from within. The woman led us inside. Her steps were slower now, measured, as though each step carried weight. The air felt still, too still. Holmes removed his gloves, without a word. We followed her up the staircase. Each step creaked softly beneath our feet. The sound lingered, longer than it should have. Halfway up, Holmes stopped. He looked down briefly, at the wood, then continued. The woman said nothing. She did not turn back. At the top of the stairs, she hesitated. Her hand trembled near the door. "That is the room," she whispered. Holmes stepped forward. Gently, he did not touch the handle at once. Instead, he observed it. The edges, the keyhole, the faint marks around it. Then he opened the door. Slowly, the room revealed itself. Dimly lit, a single candle still burned, its flame unsteady. The air inside was cold, noticeably colder. Watson remained near the doorway. Holmes stepped in, carefully. His eyes moved across the room. Nothing disturbed, nothing overturned. Everything, almost in place, except the figure on the floor. She lay near the bed, still, unmoving. The dress was dark, stained. Holmes approached. Slowly, he did not kneel at once. Instead, he observed from a distance the angle of the body, the position of the hands, the direction of the head. Then he crouched, only slightly. His face remained calm, but his eyes, sharp, very sharp. Watson stepped closer. "She is dead," he said quietly. Holmes did not respond, not immediately. His gaze lingered on the shoes, the fabric, the hands. Then he spoke. "Perhaps," he said. Watson frowned. Holmes rose and turned slightly toward the woman. "You have seen your tenant before," he said. She nodded faintly. "Yes, in this light." The woman hesitated, then shook her head. "No." Holmes glanced once more at the body, then toward the window, then back again. "No struggle," he murmured. "No disorder." He stepped back, calm, composed. "But something is wrong." A pause, long enough to be felt. "This woman," Holmes said quietly, "was not meant to be found so soon." Holmes did not rush. He never did, not when the truth was close. He moved slowly across the room, his eyes searching, not for what was present, but for what did not belong. Watson remained near the doorway, silent, watching. The woman stood behind him, barely breathing. Holmes stopped near the table. There was a candle, half burned. He leaned closer, studied the wax, the shape, the drip, then straightened. This was not used by one person, he said quietly. Watson stepped forward. What do you mean? Holmes did not answer at once. Instead, he turned slightly and moved toward the floor, near the body. He crouched again. His fingers hovered above the wooden surface, not touching, just observing. There are marks, he murmured, faint, but present. Watson leaned in. I see nothing. Holmes gave a faint smile. Exactly. A pause. Then the first set is partial, Holmes continued, worn, familiar with the room. He shifted his gaze slightly. The second is not. Watson's expression changed. Another person, Holmes nodded. At least one, the woman gasped softly. Holmes rose again, calm, composed. He turned toward the bed. The sheets were untouched, perfectly arranged. No struggle, he said. No sign of resistance. Watson frowned. But she is dead. Yes, Holmes replied, which makes it all the more interesting. He walked toward the window. The curtain moved slightly. A cold draft passed through the room. Holmes noticed it immediately. He reached out, touched the edge of the frame, then examined the lock. It was opened, he said. From the inside, Watson stepped closer. Then someone left through here. Holmes shook his head slowly. No, a pause. Then they were watching. The room fell silent. The woman took a step back. Watching, she whispered. Holmes turned toward her. Your tenant, he said quietly, was not alone in this room. Another pause. Long, measured. She was being observed. Holmes glanced once more at the body, then at the door, then at the window, and finally, back at Watson. This is not a simple murder. His voice remained calm, but the meaning behind it was not. This is preparation. Holmes returned to the body, slowly, deliberately, as though the answer was already there, waiting. He stood above her for a moment, silent. Then he lowered himself slightly, not too close, just enough. His eyes studied the face, carefully, every detail, every line. Watson stepped nearer. The landlady said she was unsure. He murmured. Holmes did not respond. Not yet. Instead, he shifted his attention to the hands, then to the sleeves. The fabric was fine, but worn differently. He touched the edge of the cuff, lightly, then withdrew his hand. This is not recent, he said quietly. Watson frowned. What is not? Holmes looked at him. The clothing, he replied. It has been used longer than the rest. A pause. Watson looked again, trying to see it. And the face, he asked. Holmes turned back, studying once more. The light flickered, casting moving shadows across her features. This is not a face one remembers easily, Holmes said, which is precisely the problem. The woman stepped forward slightly, her voice trembling. I told you. I could not be certain. Holmes nodded. Yes, and you were correct. Silence filled the room. Watson looked from the body to Holmes. You believe she is not the tenant? Holmes straightened. Slowly, I believe, he said, that this woman was meant to be mistaken for her. The words settled heavily. The woman gasped. Then, where is my tenant? Holmes did not answer. He turned instead toward the mirror. It hung quietly on the wall, undisturbed. He approached it and studied its surface. The room is arranged, he said softly, too carefully. Watson stepped closer. What do you mean? Holmes turned his head slightly. This is not where the truth happened. A pause. Then, this is where it was placed. The candle flickered, the shadows shifted, and for the first time, the room no longer felt like a scene, but a message. Holmes remained still for a moment, as though assembling the pieces into something whole. Then he moved, not toward the body, but away from it, across the room, toward the wardrobe. He opened it slowly. Inside, only a few garments, neatly arranged. Too neatly, Holmes touched one of them. A coat, dark, lightly worn. He lifted it slightly, then examined the inside lining. His eyes narrowed. "This was not left in haste," he said quietly. Watson stepped closer. "You mean she packed?" Holmes shook his head. "No." A pause. "She never intended to stay." The words settled into the room, heavy. The woman looked confused. "But she paid in advance," she said. "For weeks." Holmes nodded. "Yes, and yet she left behind almost nothing." He turned slightly, scanning the room once more. "There are no personal items," he continued. "No letters, no keepsakes, no identity." Watson frowned. "That is unusual." Holmes gave a faint look. "It is deliberate." A silence followed. Then Holmes moved toward the small writing desk. There was dust, undisturbed, except one place. A faint outline, rectangular. Something had been there, recently removed. Holmes leaned closer. His finger traced the edge in the dust. "Taken," he murmured. Watson leaned in. "What was it?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he straightened and looked toward the window again. "Something important enough," he said, "to remove after the act." The woman stepped forward, fear growing in her voice. "Then she was here." Holmes turned to her. "Yes." A pause, but not for long. Another silence, longer this time. Watson spoke quietly. "Then where is she now?" Holmes' gaze drifted from the empty wardrobe to the undisturbed bed, to the body on the floor. Then he answered, "She left this room alive." The words hung in the air, cold, certain, and whoever returned did not. Holmes stood by the window, still, listening, as though the room itself might speak. Then he turned, not toward the door, but upward, to the ceiling. Watson followed his gaze. "There is nothing there," he said. Holmes did not reply. He stepped closer, examining the line where wall met ceiling, carefully, patiently. Then he moved to the corner, near the wardrobe. There was a faint irregularity, barely visible, a slight break in the surface. Holmes reached up. His fingers traced the edge, then pressed. A soft sound followed, almost inaudible. A panel shifted. Watson stepped forward at once. "A hidden passage." Holmes allowed himself a faint nod. "Not built for speed," he said quietly, "but for silence." He opened it slightly further. Darkness within, narrow, concealed. The woman gasped behind them. "I never knew." Holmes did not look back. "Few would," he replied. He leaned closer, studying the interior. "The dust is disturbed," he murmured. "Recently." Watson peered inside. "It leads somewhere." Holmes straightened. "Yes." A pause. "Somewhere above." He glanced once more at the room, then toward the body. "Whoever entered this room did not use the door." The words settled heavily. Watson turned slowly. Then they were watching her from there. Holmes' eyes sharpened. For some time, a silence followed. Then Holmes stepped away from the passage and toward the door. He examined the handle once more, then the floor, then the faint marks near the threshold. They left this way, he said. Watson looked confused. But you said, Holmes raised a hand slightly. They entered unseen, but they did not leave unseen. A pause. Watson's expression changed. You mean someone saw them? Holmes turned his head slightly, toward the landlady. No, he said quietly. I mean, they wanted to be seen. The woman stepped back, fear rising again. Why? Holmes did not answer immediately. He looked once more at the body, then toward the hidden passage, and finally to Watson. Because, he said softly, this was never meant to remain hidden. Holmes did not move at once. He stood between the window and the body, as though both told the same story, from different directions. Watson waited. The woman said nothing. Then Holmes spoke. Let us consider what we know. His voice was calm, measured. This room was prepared. He gestured lightly. The body was placed. A pause. The exit was chosen. Another pause. And the discovery. He turned his head slightly. Was ensured. Watson frowned. Then this was planned from the beginning. Holmes inclined his head. Yes. He walked slowly toward the body again. But this time, he did not look at the face. Instead, he looked at the position. The body lies where it can be seen immediately. He gestured toward the door. No concealment, no delay. The woman's voice trembled. Why would anyone do that? Holmes did not answer immediately. He turned, instead, toward her. How often did you check this room? She hesitated. Not often, only when necessary. Holmes nodded. And tonight, I had a feeling, she said quietly. A strange feeling. Holmes' eyes sharpened slightly. Yes, he said. Exactly. Watson stepped forward. You mean she was meant to find it? Holmes looked at him. Yes. A pause. Specifically her. The woman stepped back, confused. Why me? Holmes took a slow breath. Then he spoke. Because you are uncertain. The words settled heavily. You do not know your tenant well. You cannot be sure. He gestured toward the body, and that is precisely what was required. Watson's expression changed. You mean the killer needed doubt? Holmes nodded. Not fear, not secrecy, but confusion. He turned toward the window again. The kind of confusion that delays action. The room fell silent. Watson spoke more quietly now. Then the real target, Holmes finished the thought, is still alive. A long pause followed. The woman's voice barely formed. Then, this was not the crime. Holmes turned slowly, his expression calm, but final. No, he said. This was only the signal. Holmes stood very still, as though the final pieces were already in place. Watson watched him closely. The woman said nothing. She seemed afraid to speak. Then Holmes turned, not to the body, but to the door. The sequence is clear, he said quietly. They entered unseen. He gestured lightly. They remained. For some time, a pause. They observed. Another pause. They waited. Watson stepped forward. For what? Holmes' eyes moved slowly across the room. For certainty, the word settled. Heavy, he began to walk. Slowly, measured steps. The tenant, he continued, was never the victim. The woman inhaled sharply. Holmes did not stop. She was the objective. Watson frowned. You mean she was being followed? Holmes nodded. For some time, he moved toward the desk again, his gaze resting on the empty space in the dust. She possessed something, he said. something worth watching. Watson looked at the mark, the missing object. Holmes inclined his head. Yes. A pause. Something removed after the act. The woman stepped forward, her voice trembling again. What was it? Holmes did not answer. Instead, he turned toward the hidden passage. His expression remained calm, but his voice sharpened. They waited until she left. Watson's eyes widened. Then she was not here when it happened. Holmes shook his head. No. A pause. The room was empty. The candle flickered. The shadows moved. Watson spoke carefully. Then the woman on the floor, Holmes finished it, was brought here. Another silence. The woman pressed her hand to her mouth. But why her? Holmes turned, slowly, to resemble the tenant, he said. To delay recognition, to create doubt. He took a breath. Then, the longer the doubt, the longer the real target remains free. Watson stepped closer. Then the tenant, Holmes looked directly at him, is now in danger. The words landed heavily. Final. Watson lowered his voice. Can we still find her? Holmes did not answer at once. He turned toward the window. The fog outside had thickened, almost impenetrable. Then, quietly, yes. A pause, but not by following her. Watson frowned. Then how? Holmes' gaze remained fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. By following what they came for. Holmes did not move from the window. For a long moment, he simply watched the fog, as though it might part, and reveal the answer. Watson waited. The woman stood in silence. Then Holmes spoke. Everything in this room points away from the body. He turned slowly, his eyes calm, certain. The woman on the floor was never the purpose. A pause. She was the distraction. Watson took a step forward. Then the object. Holmes inclined his head. Yes, the true center of the case. He moved toward the desk once more, his gaze fixed on the empty mark in the dust. They came for it. A pause. They took it. Another pause. And then, they left something behind. Watson looked at the body. The false identity. Holmes nodded. To delay pursuit. To mislead. To buy time. The woman spoke again, her voice barely steady. But what was it? Holmes turned toward her. Something your tenant could not keep. A pause. Something that made her valuable. Watson frowned. A document. Holmes did not answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and removed a small object. Thin, folded. Watson stared. You found it. Holmes gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. No. A pause. I knew where to look. He unfolded it slightly. Not enough to reveal everything. Only enough to confirm. The woman stepped closer. What is it? Holmes looked at her. Then quietly, a map. The word lingered. Watson's expression changed. To where? Holmes folded it again, carefully. That, he said, is where she went. Silence followed. The weight of it settled into the room. Watson spoke, at last. Then we must go after her. Holmes turned, already moving toward the door. Yes, a pause. But not to save her. Watson stopped, confused. Holmes glanced back, only once, to find who was waiting for her. The candle flickered, the shadows stretched, and as we stepped out into the night, the fog closed in around us, as though the city itself wished to keep the truth hidden for just a little longer. And somewhere beyond the fog, the real story waits.